Tuesday. You'll be on our third floor downstairs, but we'll give you all those directions. There'll be signs and all that sort of thing. But we're proud to be involved. We're proud to support this effort. So enjoy the training.
All right, so for those of you that I don't know yet, my name is Sophia Hall. I'm an attorney with the Lawyers for Civil Rights, formerly known as the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. Thank you so much for being part of this. The first thing I want to tell you is that, you could spend your time a lot of ways, giving back, doing your pro bono, doing your community service. And there are lots of people who have very strong emotions and feelings about the outcome of elections. But what I love about election protection is that on the day of, you are going to be doing a tremendous effort. You are going to be the reason why somebody sticks around because you tell them there's someone on the way to open the doors late for that polling center so they can vote. You're going to be the person that makes sure that they're in the right line at that building in the appropriate precinct so that they can cast a meaningful ballot instead of a provisional ballot. You're going to be the person that tells somebody, it's 7:58. You can get in line because the law says that until 8 p.m. you have the right to vote anybody that's in the line by 8 p.m. You really are going to be the difference between people, normal people, casting their vote or not. And I really can't think of something more tremendous that you could do on election day than that. So for me, from my team, from Wilmer, thank you for giving your time. Yeah? Okay. So for the new people in the room, let's just see quickly by show of hands, how many of you did election protection in the past? Okay, great. Lots of new returning folks. How many of you have ever done any sort of voter protection, even if it was a partisan program? Okay, cool. So we probably don't have too many new people who are not familiar at all. So if I'm giving you too much of basics, I apologize, but I think it's worth knowing a little bit about the program that you're giving your time to. So election protection is the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection campaign. It started in 2000 after the Bush-Gore debacle, and it's actually housed in the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. They have a full-time staff that work year-round to do voter protection work. But I think it's worth knowing what you are a part of. And as a side note, for people who will be listening to the recording of this, I recognize that you cannot see the slides that we are currently discussing, but you will have access to this PowerPoint, so you will be able to follow along, even though it will not be visible on this recording. So on election day, there are going to be 28 states with election protection programs, like ours in Massachusetts. There will be almost 81,000. I actually think the numbers are a little bit higher now. So probably closer to 82,000 volunteers on the ground or running hotlines like you. And in 2016, in terms of just thinking about what you really do, there was nearly 120,000 voters that called into the hotline asking for assistance. Just in Massachusetts, here at WilmerHale, we received over 400 calls to our hotline in 2016. And that doesn't count the ones that called my cell phone directly or the command center because they were extremely concerned about something that was imminent. So you guys will be busy. So that you know, we don't do this in a vacuum. We don't do this on our own. The Lawyers Committee is partnering with a group of other grassroots democracy-based organizations who have done this with us time and time again. And really, without their help, we couldn't get this program off the ground. So our partners up here today, Common Cause Massachusetts, Pam Wilmot, their executive director, is extremely helpful in all of this work. The Anti-Defamation League, the League of Women Voters, ACLU Massachusetts, and Mass Vote. There are a few people in the room. So can Ian, would you just wave your hand for me? Ian's from Mass Vote. Did I see Amy? Okay, you may see Amy or Meryl Kessler come along soon from ADL or for the League of Women Voters. So what's the program all about? The program is two inner working components, the hotline where you guys will all be and the field program. Just so that you are aware, you will only be routed English-speaking callers. If other callers call in that do not speak English as a first language, they will automatically be routed to one of our partner programs. So we have hotline assistance in other languages. We will not expect our volunteers to provide that service. And this year is the very first time that we now have a hotline that's going to be provided in Arabic. Can't tell how many little graphics there are. So what's your role? What do you do? Your job's twofold. Your job is to assist the voter, get them the help or the information they need to ensure that they can cast their ballot, and to properly record the information, specifically the issue that the voter is facing and how or whether it was resolved. So you won't look exactly like this picture setup, but you will be in a room here in WilmerHale. You will be given a station. You will have a headset, a phone system so that you can be on your line all day, and you'll have a computer so that you can access any information that you need, including the registration lookup resource, which we're going to talk about. You will also have all of your handouts that you have today, as well as a script that you can look at just so you can kind of get comfortable talking to voters in case this is your first time. All right, so literally what will you do? Your phone's going to ring, you're going to pick up, and you're going to say something to the extent of, "Thank you for calling election protection. What is your name? Can I have your phone number?" And then you're going to say, "How can I help you?" The reason the first thing you ask for is the name and phone number is because that is the information that OVL, Our Vote Live, the system that we use to log our information, that's the way that they look up callers or tickets, and they ensure that you're not duplicating work. So every year when someone has not done this work before, they say like, well, what do I need to know? I don't know if I know enough law to be able to help anyone. One, you don't need to know it all. The great thing about working the hotline or this program, even in the field, is that we are all here to work together. You will never be left without someone nearby to ask a question to. You do not need to learn this stuff like it's a test, but it's helpful to have some basic knowledge, and there will be common questions and issues that you have that you will be prepared to ask or answer. So what sort of things? A lot of the questions you're going to get on election day are going to be about registration and about proper polling locations. I would say probably 50% of the issues that voters face is, am I in the right place? Or why am I not on this list? Let's figure out what the problem is. You also might get some questions regarding inactive voting, particular type of ballots, the time that the polling sites open or close, some issues about ID, some issues about accessibility. And although I've never seen a question in Massachusetts about this because we have pretty good laws, you could have somebody just have the question of whether or not, because they have formally been incarcerated, they are allowed to vote. All right, so I like to work through hypotheticals. It just seems to sort of make things easier in my mind. Some of these issues are inner working, so if I pose a scenario and you have a question about it, go ahead, toss your hand up. I want to answer questions in real time, but know that it may be something that I'm going to address in a later slide. It's fine for us to jump around, though. So you're at your phone, and the phone rings, and you talk to this voter. You ask them their name. You ask them their phone number. Say, what's the problem that you're facing? Well, the person in the polling site told me that I'm not registered. Again, this is going to be the most common issue that you face. So the first thing that you're going to do, it doesn't want to show me this page. Here it goes. All right. So this is where I tell you guys way too much about my life because I use myself as an example. The Secretary of State's office has a registration lookup tool. It's definitely the #1 resource. It'll be bookmarked on your computer stations. Basically, if a voter calls and says, I don't know if I'm registered, I don't know if I'm in the right polling site, and I don't know whether or not I'm active or inactive, this is the resource that's going to tell you this information. Why would a voter potentially call you about this rather than do this themselves on their smartphone or at home? A, they might not know about the tool. B, they may not have a smartphone to look it up. C, they may have met a field program volunteer on the ground, and that field program volunteer either doesn't have a smartphone to help them do this, or the voter's just not comfortable giving that poll worker or that poll observation person their personal information, like their birthday, and so they'd rather just call someone on the hotline and have you work through the issue with them. So this registration tool asks for a first and last name, a birthday, and a zip code. You verify that you understand what you're putting in, and then you press search. All right. Now what we're going to get is they're going to tell you whether or not this person is registered. They're going to tell you the polling location where this person should be voting. And they're going to tell you whether or not this person is active. We're going to talk through what those three things mean as we go forward. But what I want you to know is that this is probably your number one tool to be able to help voters on the ground. Again, because about 50% of the problems people face is just knowing if they're in the right place. One of the things that this might not help you with, lots of polling locations in Massachusetts have multiple precincts in one building. So for example, you live in a town, precinct 2, 3, and 4, they're all in the community center. But you have to be in the right line to be at the right precinct. And if you wait in line for a long time and you get to the front and realize that you're not at the right precinct, you will not be able to vote on a traditional ballot. You would vote on a challenge or provisional ballot, which we do not want voters to have to do. So it's really important also, if there's any information that we can provide, sometimes you can come to the command center and we can help you figure out what part of the building to be at if it's not clear. I have it on my master list, what entrance it's supposed to be or what part of the building each precinct is in. You can help a voter figure out what line they should be in at that particular site, the line that corresponds with their precinct. But that may not be readily available from looking at this tool. It's coming back up. Now I know. Don't worry. In the meantime, any questions about that information? Yes?
So they get in the wrong line, but they realize it within a couple minutes. Can't they just go and join the correct line?
So for the people listening to the recording, the question is, what if they get in the wrong line, so the scenario we just discussed, but then they realize it, can't they just get back in the appropriate line? The answer is yes, they certainly can. The problem becomes, if you're at a polling site with very long lines and people are trying to vote on their lunch break or they just don't have the capacity to be out of work that long, they may find that because of time constraints, maybe they can't wait in the other line. Then you can basically give them a choice. You can tell them, you can stay in this line. You will be allowed to vote provisionally on a provisional ballot in this line, which we don't highly recommend because provisional ballots don't count on election day, meaning they are not counted on election day to go into the estimate about, who they think is going to succeed or not. Technically, you can't confirm whether or not your provisional ballot was counted until 20 days after the election, or they can then be directed to the appropriate line. What we hope is that if people know that they're in the wrong place in advance, because our volunteers are on the ground making sure that people who look confused or ask the question are in the right places, then they won't find themselves having waited an hour before they realize their mistake. Or if they called one of you on the hotline, you could tell them far enough in advance so that they can change or correct the issue before it's too far along. All right, so we just talked kind of about this scenario. A poll worker calls and they say, I'm not on the list or I'm not registered. The first thing that you're going to do is look them up with the tool at the Secretary of State's website to determine whether they're registered and whether they're at the correct precinct. Now, there's something called a 6-month rule. If a person has moved and they have not registered at their new address and it's within 6 months, they may still vote at their old precinct. But the two things have to be clear. They have to have moved within 6 months and they cannot have registered at their new precinct. If they do that, they're just going to toss their ballot and it won't count. So it's important to kind of know about that 6-month rule so that a voter can know where they appropriately should be voting. Now, what if a voter says, they told me, or when you looked me up on the website, it says that I'm inactive. Inactive is very different than any other category of voting status. Being inactive has nothing to do with your registration or whether or not you voted in the past. Being inactive only matters whether or not you have completed your city or town's local survey. They call it a street survey or a census. Every city and town in Massachusetts, all 351 of them, have a local census. If you don't complete your annual census for 2 years in a row, they put you on an inactive list as a voter. What that means is that you are likely not in the primary registration book that's at the polling site. You're likely in another book, a secondary book for inactive voters. If you are in that book, sometimes polling workers might forget that that book exists. So when you go to check in, they just say you're not here because they haven't checked that second book. One of the things you're going to recommend to a voter who calls you, who you realize is inactive, is that remind them that they have that second book, or look for a volunteer on the ground to help you advocate for them looking for your name in that second book. They should not have any problem voting on a traditional ballot. However, they will likely be in that second book, and this is one of the small situations under our Massachusetts laws where they can ask to see a form of ID. I'm going to tell you more about IDs later, so hold all your very, exciting questions until then. This is kind of what we just talked about, but one point that this makes clear to me I didn't mention is that if you find that your voter you're helping is inactive, and they find themselves in the second book, the inactive book, and they're asked for ID and they have an appropriate documentation, what we would call ID, which is a misnomer, it's not a photo ID, but let's say they have the appropriate documentation to show ID, or they swear an oath or an affidavit of their residency. If for some reason they don't have an appropriate form of ID or don't swear an affidavit, they will be given a challenge ballot. A challenge ballot is different than a traditional ballot and different than a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots are the ones we don't like. They don't count on election day. Challenge ballots do count, but they are verified in a different way. So the voter signs on the sealed envelope that a challenge ballot goes into. They're kept in a different space. They don't get fed into the machine, but they should be verified by the end of the day so they count for election day. Unlike a provisional ballot, which there's a longer time frame under the law in terms of when they need to be counted and verified. So is that clear? If inactive, look in the second book. They'll probably ask you for ID. If you have ID, you should get your ballot and be good to go. If you don't have ID, then you may be given a challenge ballot. If your voter tells you they wanted to give me a provisional ballot, tell them they're wrong. You should be given a challenge ballot. Some poll workers are very confused about the difference between challenge ballots and provisional ballots. It's a problem we saw in 2016 in certain states. Also, they don't get as many challenge ballots and provisional ballots as they get traditional ballots. So sometimes we've had issues where polling locations have just run out of the appropriate ballot. So maybe they try to give a provisional ballot instead of a challenge one because they ran out, or maybe they ran out of both and then they offer the voter nothing, and that is problematic. All right, so I told you I'd tell you about IDs. For those of you that don't know, and because you probably have heard lots of litigation across the country about IDs, Massachusetts actually has decent laws about voter IDs. A, you should not be asked for an identification in order to vote in Massachusetts unless 3 situations. Those 3 situations are, you are a first-time voter, you are identified as an inactive voter, or a poll worker has reasonable suspicion that you may not be the person that you are presenting yourself to be. We have never had a voter call us with that scenario, but if somebody does call you with that, you're going to shoot your hand up really quickly because your captain needs to be notified, and your captain is going to notify the command center. And we'll talk a little bit about when you might do that in other scenarios. But basically, an ID is not a photo ID. It's not a passport. It's not a state ID. It's not necessarily a photo ID in any way. It's any documentation that you have that has your name and the address to where you are registered. I'm talking about a lease. I'm talking about a rent bill. I'm talking about a utility bill. Whatever you have, you don't even have to have it in paper form. You can pull up your utility bill on your cell phone, and you should be able to show a poll worker that, and that should suffice as identification. If you have someone call you saying they said I needed ID, I didn't have an ID, or they said I need an ID, but they're not a first-time voter and they were not inactive, those are problems that we definitely want to track, and we definitely want to come to the command center. Here we go. When can they ask for it? And also, I'm sorry, I should have told you, if you are casting a provisional or challenge ballot, they'll also ask for identification so they can write down your name and address on the outside of the envelope and have you sign it. So we talked a little bit about this again. Provisional ballots are basically the ballots of last resort. It's better than not voting at all. It's better than walking away because let's say you can clarify whatever the issue is. It will count, hopefully. But they're not counted for election day projections, and they're based upon a city's clerk's office properly processing them, properly addressing whatever issue caused you to get the provisional ballot. And there's just a lot more room for human error, for computer error. Our job on Tuesday is to ensure that every person that is eligible, can cast a meaningful ballot. So a provisional ballot really isn't meeting our goal. But it may be better than nothing. And again, that scenario we talked about earlier, the person who waited in the wrong line, and they just don't have the time because of work to be able to wait in the line that's the appropriate precinct for where they are registered. For that person, it might be better to file a provisional ballot than do nothing. So, they serve some purpose, but ideally they are very much the ballot of last resort. Any questions about that? So very quickly about accessibility issues. In Massachusetts, we also have pretty good accessibility laws. If you are a person living with a physical disability, such as you use a wheelchair or you are visually impaired, polls are supposed to be equipped to deal with that issue, meaning they're supposed to have ramps, they're supposed to have automatic doors, they're supposed to have enough space for you to get to the area where you fill out your ballot. Similarly, if English is not your first language and there is not a high enough percentage of people in your city or town that speaks another language such that the Voting Rights Act requires them to have bilingual ballots or translators, that was a mouthful. So if the town doesn't have a high enough proportion based off their census of people who do not speak English, they're not legally required to have translators or bilingual ballots. That's the case in a lot of places in Massachusetts. What that means is that if this person doesn't speak English as their first language, they might think they can't vote because they may not be able to read the ballot itself. That's not true. They can bring in anybody of their choice to help assist them with completing their ballot. So the little old grannies who might not speak English, they can bring their granddaughter or their grandson with them to help them with that ballot. It's anyone of their choice, including our poll workers, our volunteers who are in the field program on the ground. If they feel comfortable, our volunteers are going to help people read those ballots if they speak both languages and have the ability to do that. If you don't have anyone at all and they don't see one of our volunteers on the ground, they can ask the poll workers to assist them. The law says that they're supposed to get 2 people of different parties who go into the voting area with them to read the ballot to them so that they can understand how to complete it. Let's say for some reason a voter calls you and says, I don't speak English or I don't read English, and thus I don't think I can fill out my ballot and vote today. What should I do? You should be able to tell them, do you have anybody with you that can help you? Do you see a volunteer with an election protection t-shirt or button? Or you can go to the poll workers and tell them that you want 2 poll workers to assist you in translating the ballot. Any questions? You guys are the quietest bunch I've had yet. This is an issue that I get a lot of calls about. I'm going to route all those calls to you guys at the hotline because this very rarely is a problem that rises to the level of me having to call Galvin's office. But technically under the law, people should not be campaigning or passing out campaign materials within 150 feet from the entrance of a polling site. Feelings aside about First Amendment rights, we're not going to get into that. That's not our job. The only time I really care about this is if those people campaigning are intimidating or harassing voters such that they cannot remain in line to be able to vote. It's the only time I want that to go to your captain. It's the only time I want that to come to the command center. If it's not a problem that's stopping people from voting, note it. Let's go ahead and track that data, but it's not going to be something that rises to the level of us having to deal with it. We get a lot of calls about this, and people are very concerned. One thing I am going to flag for people is that you may find that there are people either campaigning or challenging voters, particularly in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Specifically, and this has been public, so I have no problem sharing it, there's a group called Mass Fiscal that got all of the voting, people who are registered to vote in Massachusetts in a particular ward, sent out notices, and some of them came back undeliverable for various reasons. And they contacted Galvin's office because they are concerned that those people are not properly registered. Historically, we have had groups like this come to particular polling sites. Unfortunately, polling sites where perhaps there are higher numbers of immigrants, people of color, low income, disabled, and challenge or harass voters in that way. If anybody hears, hey, there's somebody here from from Mass Fiscal that is giving me a hard time, that's asking me about if I am the person I am or trying to pass out materials, then please make sure you raise your hand and let the captain know. They've specifically identified Lawrence as a problem area, so just kind of be on the alert that if you hear mass fiscal, that should be a buzzword or send off a red flag for you. All right, so we talked earlier about your job. Your job is twofold: taking the calls, answering the questions, and then accurately entering the data. What I tell volunteers, whether you're in the field or on the phone, our goal is to make sure that people can cast a meaningful ballot on Tuesday. But our larger goal is to address systemic problems that make it difficult for people to vote in Massachusetts. We at the Lawyers Committee or Lawyers for Civil Rights, do work. We do litigation and advocacy in the voting rights space. And the goal is to make sure that Massachusetts keeps getting better, that it is as easy as humanly possible, and that people are not being disenfranchised for whatever reason. By you tracking this data, what it allows us to do after the fact is be able to see where are the problem areas and what are the problem issues that are systemic that we want to address. So it's really important to try to capture as much information from a voter as you can. One of the questions that they'll ask you on Our Vote Live, or OVL, will be about asking the voter for their race. People who don't do racial justice work regularly find some discomfort with discussing with a person that you don't know, what your race is. The reality is you just put it out there. The best way I can tell you to ask this question is to say, "Hi, can you please tell me how you racially identify?" If they ask why, tell them what it is. Tell them, well, this program is on behalf of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the Lawyers for Civil Rights. They are a racial justice organization, and they want to address systemic issues that have a particular impact on different racial groups, on different groups that speak other languages, on low-income groups. And so we track this information to make sure that this maybe is a one-off problem versus something that's systemically affecting the community. If they give you a really hard time and push back and are not comfortable answering it, let it go. But I at least want you to make the effort to try to ask the question on the ticket. All right. Oh, no. Will we get audio in here on the computer? It's okay if we won't. I'll just...
Let's give it a shot.
All right. I don't hear any audio.
Oh, it should be going already?
Yeah.
Here, I'll have...
Well, as this is happening, you can't hear the audio, but I'll narrate for you a bit. This is what the beginning of Our Vote Live looks like. This is kind of the login. Each of you will be given, your name will be put in the system, and you will have your email, and they'll have a password for you to sign in.
I'll call.
No problem. All right, so the first screen that you're going to see when you log into Our Vote Live is about find a ticket. And remember, I told you guys the first piece of information you're going to ask a voter is for their phone number, because that's the way Our Vote Live kind of logs a ticket. They don't use names, they use phone numbers to log tickets. And so you'll put in this person's phone number, and it will either take you to a ticket that's previously been opened that has not yet been closed, because maybe this is a problem that they've had more than once or that has not been completely addressed, or it will create a brand new ticket for you.
Do you need me to get audio, or are you going to?
No.
Okay.
Just so you know, you guys will all get sent a link with this PowerPoint. You can then watch the audio yourself if you have any questions. You'll also get all of the handouts you have today in front of you, as well as extra materials, because I know a lot of you guys are lawyers and you want to know everything there is to know. So I make sure I pass out some extra materials just for you to look at. Yes?
Phone number, is that the phone that they have on them at the time, or is it their home number, or is it
So the question from the audience was whether or not the phone number they provide you matters, if it's a home versus a cell, if they have multiple phone numbers. The only reason that the phone number matters is that it's consistent if they've given it before, so that they pull up the same ticket. So if you wanted to be certain, you could just simply say, well, have you called before, or what phone number did you provide in the past? But it's not as though it's going to pull up a specific individual like the registration tool. So it's not connected to any information. It's just a way of tracking the information they've told the hotline person. So long as they're consistent in the phone number they give, it shouldn't make a difference. All right, and so once you create a ticket, this screen is going to come up. And as you can see, it's basic demographic information, and then it's a box at the bottom that says issue details. And that itself is just you're going to write out what the problem is and what you're doing for the voter. Here, what it's showing you really importantly is the voter's address. They want you to save it. This is so that, let's say this is one of these systemic problems that we're seeing and we need the ability to follow up with this voter to get more information down the road. Possibly they want to be involved in the advocacy or in the litigation that potentially comes out of a systemic issue. This just ensures that we can contact these people. It'll also verify the address for you. If you find that you're having problems with the system verifying the address as the way the voter has given it to you, don't worry about it. What I would suggest, if they're giving you a really hard time, because the computer system sometimes has glitches, just take the address they give you, but write in your issue box, the voter has indicated that their address is X, which is different than what was provided above. I wouldn't let this give you a hard time, though. OVL is a system that constantly is improving over time, but very slowly. And so here, like our registration tool, it gives you information based off that address about where their polling place should be, their precinct, things like that. This is, again, just showing you that you can look up a person's polling place here. In my opinion, the most up-to-date information is from the Secretary of State's website, so I'm just going to encourage you to use that lookup tool. While I don't know if it will be, up to date as of Monday, it should be up to date as of registration deadline. So that for us is the tool that we use, but OVL provides an alternate means of looking up polling locations. And yes?
Are we going to have access to 2 laptops, or is this on different windows of the same computer? And we don't have to bring our own laptop.
Correct. So, and if I'm incorrect, please make sure you say so. The question from the audience was, do we need to bring laptops with us to the hotline shift, or will something be provided for us? Will it have more than one screen? I don't recall if there was more than one screen, but it certainly will be bookmarked so that you can have more than one window on the screen. And so you could simply just, switch over to your other window and look up the person on the registration tool and then come back to OVL and write in whatever you need to in the narrative section. And so, here's an example of what this person's writing in. It doesn't need to be, a memo or anything. This says voter needs to find polling place, looking up the polling place and giving the information to the voter, and verifying that the voter knows where that address is. And now this person has resolved their problem. And so they're going to ask you to categorize the issue type. This issue type is a polling place problem. You've provided any additional information, such as if you've asked race as you should, and they've given you that information. They also ask that you ask them how they were notified about the hotline. Did they hear it from a volunteer on the ground? Did they see advertising on social media? Again, for me, that's not the end of the world. It helps to think about better ways that we can advertise this information for 2020. But the biggest thing for me is that we're tracking the race and the issue type and giving enough detailed information to follow up if we need to with a systemic issue. So the question from the audience member was, should the completion of this OVL ticket be simultaneous, or should you help the voter with the information that they need and then go back and fill it out? I don't really have a preference. I believe that in terms of how the trainings are set up from national, the idea is that it should be simultaneous, and they think that the information you're taking is not very onerous, and so you can do it as you're talking over the phone. But if you find that that's difficult, or that the voter is kind of like, I need to go, I don't want to talk to you anymore, I'm going to tell you to use your best judgment in terms of engaging with that voter. The biggest thing for me is that you give them the information they need and you properly track and record the data that we need to follow to ensure that if it's a systemic problem, we can follow up. So what happens with these phone lines is that, and this is actually, let me hold on that question until the end. So the question from the audience member was, once you hang up or you finish or disengage with your phone, it won't automatically do something with your systems to send you to the next person. And that's a really good question for the phone line people, and we're going to talk through that a little bit later with more about logistics. And so this is the last screen that you're going to get, and it basically is going to tell you, do you want to finalize this ticket, or do you want to hold this ticket, or do you want to elevate this ticket? And the options basically are: finalizing it means you resolve the problem for the voter, done deal. Hold the ticket might mean that you need to leave it open, not hold the voter on the phone, but you might need to keep the ticket open to address something with the captain or the command center. Elevate the ticket is that this is a big problem and we're going to send it over to the command center. And so whether it's the captain and the ticket being elevated, or maybe the captain's busy, but you need to send this ticket over, you're just going to elevate it and it's going to pop up on the screen in the command center for the command staff to deal with. All right. Yes. So no, so we won't, the question from the audience was, if you press elevate on the ticket to send it to the command center, will that also automatically transfer the caller to the command center? And the answer is no. Part of the reason why we need you to make sure you get the contact information that's appropriate for the voter is so that we can call them back. Ideally, if it's something that they need in real time, we might ask the voter to hold on while the captain runs over to the command center to address the problem. But if it's just not feasible to resolve it in, 3 to 5 minutes, then we wouldn't keep the line tied up. We would just tell the voter, is this the correct contact information for you? Okay, I'm going to get you to an appropriate person that can help you. They'll give you a call back in a few minutes. Just so that you guys all know, while you're working the hotline, all day there are people who do voter protection work from our various coalition partners who will be in the command center, including Ann Bowie and Jenny. We're going to be there to deal with the big issues, the things that are really stopping people imminently from voting. So, for example, if we find out that a particular polling site, it's 7:20 and the doors aren't open yet, and the law says they're supposed to be open at 7, that might come to the command center because I need to call the head lawyer for Galvin's office and say, you have a problem on the ground in this precinct. I need you to get over there and get somebody to open the doors. And that might be something that comes to us in real time because people have to vote before they go to work. Similarly, if a ballot box is broken, so a voting machine is broken in a particular precinct, and people are waiting around to see whether or not their votes are being properly handled and taken in, that would be something that's imminently potentially stopping people from voting. And so it might come to the command center so that we can deal with it in real time. If it's something like, okay, the voting signs aren't really prominently displayed here, or this particular voter is having a problem, but they're off all day, or they are flexible about their time so they can wait around for us to figure this out, that might not come to the command center. Generally, systemic issues are going to come to the command center's attention because we know that there's a group or there's a significant number of voters who are having a problem there. And most often, that is either A, we've gotten a lot of calls about one problem, like those provisional ballots being given out when they shouldn't be, places not being open, machines not working properly, not having enough translation services, so voters are leaving because they don't know, they can't get any help and they don't know how to talk with the polling workers or fill out their ballot. Those are the kind of systemic things that usually are going to come to the command center via your captain so that we can make sure that everything gets taken care of. So our national office has this toolbox, which gives you basically the handouts and the materials that we have. I'm probably going to not have this on your computer system. In part, I just think it requires a lot of additional assistance to go to another website. We'll make sure that you have all of the handouts with all of the information that's in front of you logged onto your computer somewhere or physically present in your shift area so that you have all the information you need. The only sort of online tool that I anticipate you will need will be the registration lookup tool from the Secretary of State's office that we've talked about. Just so you know, these are some of the papers that you're looking at today. You have sheets in front of you. Hopefully everybody got one. Those will be online, again, or paper form for you on the day of. But they're just commonly asked questions, FAQs, issues, some background on particular voting issues that come up commonly. Basically, some of the things that we've talked about today. But there might be additional questions about, like, absentee ballots, for example. Not really a common issue, but maybe you have a voter that asks you a question about it. There's a section on your handout about absentee ballots. So I keep saying captain, but I realize I haven't really told you guys who or what a captain is. So for each shift, you're going to have a person or two that function as your captain. They're going to be in the front of the room with the command center, and they can see when you guys are on a call or when you're not on a call. They can help with routing problems. But really, they're there just as your backup. Whenever you have a problem on a phone, you can just stick your hand up in the air. The captain will come over to you and address the problem. All the captains have been given additional training so that they can fulfill their role. And if the captains have any questions or issues, they'll just grab one of us in the command center and we'll come and help out. So again, you guys won't be alone today. You'll have somebody in the room and you'll have a whole staff of people helping you in another room. So just in case you guys have not yet voted yourself, which I hope you do because today is the last day of early voting, I really suggest that you vote early so that you don't have to worry about it when you're volunteering on Tuesday. You don't want to have to deal with being stuck in a line and being late for your shift or, having to run out of here and get someplace last minute before they close and potentially having to deal with a very long line yourselves. So I do really encourage all of our volunteers to vote early. Every city and town in Massachusetts is required to provide early voting during business hours through November 2nd today. So if you haven't yet voted, I suggest that you do. It's really hard to protect the vote and then not vote yourself. In terms of just my expectations of you guys, remember, all of you are professional people. This is a professional organization. One of the reasons why I have the cell phone number for the head lawyer for the Secretary of State's office is because they trust that our volunteers are well trained, because they trust that our volunteers are professionals, and that we all believe in the common goal of ensuring that voters have the information they need to vote. So keep that in mind when you're communicating with voters. Your behavior reflects on me. And if we have problems with our volunteers on the ground or on the phone, it makes it so that Galvin's office doesn't want to talk to me anymore on election day. And then I don't have the pipeline to deal with problems in real time. And that's really important to me because, again, my ego aside, what I care about is making sure that people get the help they need on election day. And to be honest, in Massachusetts, we're one of the only resources that can do that who's nonpartisan, who can say our goal is about voting, it's not about how you vote. And that actually is a very rare resource to have for a voter on the ground. There's a lot of people there that want to have some say in how they vote, but not necessarily just ensure that they have the help they need to vote. So keep that in mind. All of the call center shifts, so let's say you know somebody that's on the ground, your shift time is slightly different than the people on the ground. We have an overlap period of 15 minutes for every shift except for the beginning of the first shift and the end of the last shift. All the shifts overlap by 15 minutes because I don't want the phone lines to be dead. You asked earlier about what happens when you complete a call. So basically, the phone lines will be red or green. Ideally, we don't want any caller to have to let the phone ring for too long, and we don't want them to go to a voicemail box. We want them to be able to talk to a person in real time. So if you guys come in late, or there are problems with the caller before, the overlap ensures that if somebody is always manning the phone all day long from 6:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the polling site's open, till 8:30 at night, 30 minutes after the polling site closes. It's very important to me that you guys show up to your shift on time just to ensure that we can keep the program moving. And what I would suggest is that let's say you do decide it's easier for you to fill in the narrative component after you finished your call. Just make sure that it's not taking too long because every time that you have your phone off, you're going to have some downtime or dead time on your line. Granted, you have to use the bathroom, you have to get food. Totally, I get that happens. Your captain will know how many phones are on or off at any time. Your captain may encourage you to hold off 5 minutes if somebody else just went to grab lunch, just so that they can ensure that more of the phone lines are covered at any given time. But if for some reason you guys are short or the call volume is really high and you don't feel like you can get away, people from the command center will come over and man phones too, just to ensure you have some backup. So we'll do what we need to do so that you guys can get away from the phone if you need to, and certainly so that you can get some breakfast or some lunch or some dinner if you're around at that time. But ideally, the goal is to try to keep our phone lines on and active all day long from 6:30 to 8:30. Any questions for me? Yes.
Are we ever, if the voters calling up for, is it ever appropriate for the poll worker over there to please get on the phone with us, or is that not?
The question from the audience was, if we are being called by a voter, on the ground, is it ever appropriate for us to communicate with the poll worker? Slightly different than her question, but I want to answer it two ways. So perhaps A, the voter has handed the phone to the poll worker without asking you, and they want you to advocate on their behalf. Or B, for some other reason, the poll worker has just called you directly at the hotline. At that point, what I would suggest is that you raise your hand and get your captain involved. There are very strict rules in Massachusetts about interfering with elections. So even our field volunteers are aware that if they are helping voters, they can't be helping them inside the polling site. They can be observing inside the polling site and then following a voter outside who looks like they had a problem. But they sign agreements with me to say that if they're inside a polling site and see a problem, they're not going to jump over to the warden and like try to duke it out with them. They're going to wait and come outside and resolve the problem either on their own or with the assistance of the command center. The reality is, you know, we have to ensure that the proper sort of steps are being taken internally. I really don't want our volunteers on the ground to be too aggressive. I don't want to have issues with them being arrested or anything of that nature. I would think that if a polling worker called you, it probably would not be a very fun call. It would probably be a very pissed off poll worker who feels as though you're interfering with them doing their job. I don't even encourage that our poll workers on the ground engage with poll workers. I do say if there's a problem that they can advocate for, they should address it with the warden, so the head person of the polling site. If for some reason a warden calls and they seem friendly, or a warden gets put on the phone and they seem friendly, still raise your hand for your captain to come over. But if you feel like you can navigate that situation amicably, that's fine. Take down the warden's name in case we need to follow up. But generally speaking, I imagine the only person who might really directly engage with the poll workers or the warden would be a volunteer on the ground who's just trying to advocate for, oh, can you double check that inactive list? Because, you know, I noticed that they're inactive. Or here, can I show you that they are registered and they're the right place? Can we figure out what to do together to help get this person voting? Or, you know, this person doesn't speak English. Would it be okay? They want me to come in with them. I'm just going to go in and help translate the vote. So more likely than not, that would be the role of a field volunteer that's on the ground.
Oh, and actually I have a follow-up. So I'm writing down the ticket of what happened, including the voter's address. I don't need to then figure out what word it is. I need the address will capture that so that everyone else can do it.
So the question was, if I take down the person, the voter who calls me, if I take down their address, do I also need to determine their precinct or ward? No, the OVL system is set up so that it should automatically input that information. There might be some bugs where maybe it's different than what the voter is telling you or different than what you look up on the Secretary of State's website. It's another thing I would just note in that narrative box if it comes up. Don't let it give you a hard time where you can't move forward with completing the ticket. Just make a note of it in the narrative area. Any other questions? Okay. So in terms of swag, of course, they never give me enough swag to give all of you t-shirts, buttons, hats, shoes, all the things I'd love to give because you guys give your time so kindly on election day with horrible weather. But I do have some t-shirts up in the front of the room. You're welcome to grab them until they're gone. There are also some t-shirts back at the office at 61 Battery March, 5th floor. I'll be there today until about 4 o'clock and there on Monday all day. If you'd like to come by and pick up a shirt, if you haven't already received one, you're welcome to do that. That's more so for the people who are watching this recording. But if you guys have any questions, I am going to stay afterwards. I'm happy to answer each and every question that you have. And again, I very much appreciate you guys taking your time to help us out on Tuesday. Yes?
Two of them actually. The easy one is should you bring lunch, like that, with us at the same time.
So a question from the audience says, should I bring lunch with me? No, we will feed you, I promise.
Okay. But the more serious question is, for those of us coming to Tuesday, 6:32, will we see these computers before they happen? Do we have a chance to kind of like log in and so forth before things get going? How else do we do with computers?
So the question from the audience is, should I come early? Are there logistics I need to address for my shift? And the answer is, I'm never going to stop you from coming early. Early is always much better than on time or late. I will be here, everyone will be here and ready in the command staff and from Goodwin by 6 o'clock. If you'd like to come in a little early, that's not a problem. I don't anticipate there's going to be too much to navigate with the logging in. It should just be your name and your email and a password that we'll have ready for you. But, it couldn't hurt to come a few minutes early in case of bugs or issues. Yes.
Is there more we can read about the challenge ballots, and are the Google voters asking us about that? Because if they're offered one, we might not understand what it is.
Yeah. So the question was specifically about the challenge ballot. And we're actually waiting right now from the lawyers department at the Secretary of State, who's putting out a new memo on challenge ballots, and we'll upload that to the Google Doc folder that we'll send around. Just so that everyone is aware, all of the materials, the PowerPoint, all of the handouts in front of you, and extra information is going to be available to you on a Google Doc folder. I will send around an email link so that you can log into those things. Excuse me. I understand that Wilmer Hale's email may cause you some difficulty with logging in that. I would just suggest that you use your personal emails to log in and look at the Google Doc folder if you have any questions about reviewing the materials or anything. If you have any problems at all accessing any of the materials, just shoot me an email. Worst case scenario, I'll attach it and just forward it to you via email. Okay? I'll make sure you get what you need. Any other questions? Yeah, well, I will be here. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate everything today and Tuesday.
Thank you.